So in the beginning of this journey, I didn't tell anybody I was trafficked. And the reason I didn't tell anybody I was trafficked is because by the time I began speaking out, I was already a consensual sex worker. And I didn't want them to, like, there's this idea that we need to be saved. Like, and the number one question that's been asked me working through the years is, so when are you going to move on? Like, when are you going to get another job? Like, it's time, right? And that's been consistent. Like, you're too good for this. You're too smart for this. Oh, you can do anything. Not understanding that that was a profession I chose. My views of what happened to me when I was, quote unquote, being trafficked, I believe that that occurred because of lack of protection under the law. I know how to call 911. You know, they don't need to create new posters for me with different numbers and helplines. I know how to call 911. I could have done that. I didn't believe anybody would listen, and I didn't believe what was on the other end of the line would be help. Today, there are tons of workers out there who are being trafficked. I engage with them on a daily basis when we do outreach. Okay, I know they're being trafficked. They'll talk to me about being trafficked, but they aren't going to call 911. And I think the question we need to ask ourselves about that is, why are they not making that call? Like, what's gone wrong? What's gone wrong where we no longer believe that those people are here to help us? And it was hard for me to talk about the trafficking and to be outright about that identity, because I identify as a sex worker. I identify as a sex worker who was exploited for a while because there was no ability for me to report that perpetrator without endangering myself or my loved ones. So today I'm out about it. Today I'm okay, and I talk about all the different aspects of my working, from the survival end to the trafficking end to my consensual end, which has been the majority of my life. But it really was a hard thing for me to come to grips with, or to be able to talk about, because as soon as you say trafficking, everybody wants to rescue you. Everybody wants to change you. They want to make you a secretary or something. And I do not fit in that hole. After all these years, I don't fit in that hole. I can't be that. So it was a very difficult thing.
I think Kristen really beautifully describes the problem with the idea of trafficking, that a lot of the force and the violence is that's happening within the sex sectors and sex trade are because of the laws against prostitution, as we know, and the fact people can't reach out and don't have any rights in that sense. But by calling it trafficking sometimes, we don't actually understand or see that it really is about a work that's not being protected, right, by laws. And so sometimes this term trafficking is unhelpful, and this is also what Annalee was talking about earlier, that it's really sometimes masks a lot. And it's easy to get on board in this sort of anti-trafficking way, but it kind of covers over, I think, some of the important issues we have to think about and talk about. It's very easy to run around the world saying we're going to be saving people from trafficking, but yet a lot of people are not looking carefully at what's underneath, and the fact that it's a lot of the laws that are actually creating problems for working women and men and trans. Whatever age they are. So I think that's a really important thing we need to think about.
I'm going to put on my criminology hat. I've done decades of research around young women and the juvenile justice system. A very large percentage of the young women, particularly in my early years of research, were running away from home. And that was how they got into the system. And then later, we had other words to pull them into the system. Many of them had experiences of trauma in their backgrounds, family-related trauma. They often were running from family-related trauma when they went onto the streets. And that was their first act of survival, and their first act of resistance was to escape the harm in their families. I really think that, and I've done interviews with those young women in detention centers. I've got several books on the topic. I'm happy to, send you an email with those details. But this is where we get back to fact-based and science-based. And I'm very familiar with a lot of the discussions about issues of trafficking in Hawaii. Virtually all of those conversations are completely untethered from the facts. And that's not to say I haven't done research on this topic, and I'm very familiar with the situation of girls on the streets in Waikiki, the kinds of things that Pam talked about. But the constructions that appear in many public fora around this, and I haven't said a great deal about this locally, but I'm going to step out today and say that we need to get back to real, good, solid information, not judgment, not hyperbole. We've had an enormous amount of hyperbole about this topic in Hawaii. And back to Kamala's question about what's unique in Hawaii, one aspect that's unique here is, of course, the tourism industry. Another aspect of our challenges come from the military presence here in the islands. The third is the destruction of native Hawaiian culture and the consequences of that, the collateral damage, if you will. But the thing that is overarching across this conversation, especially among juveniles, is that virtually all of the good, solid research on this does not support the kind of moral panic constructions that there were thousands of these girls swashing through Kahala Mall and Pearl Ridge getting, quote unquote, trafficked. That's just, as I say, it's completely untethered from reality. But that's got an enormous appeal, and I think my colleague to my left said it best when she said, this is a revenue stream for groups of people, notably law enforcement, she said NGOs, and I would add human services agencies, who basically drum up moral panic among people who have no understanding of these topics, and then go out and start running fundraisers. And millions of dollars have literally been raised in our community for a very questionable construction of the challenges we face. I'm not at all denying that the girls that you're working with have these histories, but I think it's very important that we be science-based, that we look at solid research on this population. This afternoon, I want to commend a session that's coming up. We have Center on Family has done research on sex work and homelessness in Hawaii. And that session is this afternoon. I will just pull one factoid out of that. Only 15% of the youth, and it was all youth that they surveyed, only 15% said that they'd been engaged in any kind of sex for money. So that's the first stereotype that gets, the idea that we have all these homeless youth just desperately engaging in survival sex turns out not to be accurate. Now, again, we can look at the methods, we can always improve on those methods, but this is the Center on Family Research on this dynamic in Hawaii among an extremely marginalized group of young people, not just your garden variety runaways who end up at Halekipa. So I'm going to get off the stump here, and I see Kamala wants the floor.
Oh, we all want to respond to this. Real quickly before I pass the microphone down, I want to say that Kristen should speak to this because she actually was an underage worker. I'm a certified counselor, and I think I'm hearing your question in another way. And I think what I want to praise Kristen to say that I'm not a trafficking victim, but I've been victimized in other ways. And I have found empowerment from my peers more than from helpers. And that's what Kristen brought to Swap Sacramento.
I think one of the things that we forget when we talk about sex trafficking, and you know, you can talk about any other kind of trafficking, and all of a sudden, all the hyperbole and all the emotion goes out of it. But we say sex trafficking, and people are like, oh, you know, it becomes double worse, or, you know, just something really evil. To be fair, it does happen. Yes. I am living proof. It happens. Okay? It does happen. However, okay, if we want to stop sex trafficking through arresting workers of any kind, that is not the way to do that. It will not help them. So we interviewed 44 workers on Stockton Boulevard in Sacramento. We did a needs analysis with an IRB certified researcher. That was Kimberlee and I. So we did this together. We did it with a few people, and we published a report. It was a very small report. 44 workers is not a large sample size, but when you're talking about one street, it's a pretty good sample size. Of the 44 workers we interviewed, all of them identified as either working against their will, which is our, you know, the term we use, working against your will, or engaging in survival sex. When we ask them, what do you need? What would make your life better? How can we actually help you? We got all kinds of answers. We got answers about education. We got answers about healthcare. We got answers about mental health care services. We got answers about housing, housing was number one, of drug treatment. Okay, there was only one thing that not one of our trafficking victims or our survival sex victims asked for, and that was arrest. 100% agreement that that would in no way help them. Okay, that tells you something. When we listen to the people who are out there, that's not what they're asking for in the area of help to get out of it. None of them identified that that would help them. It didn't help me. It didn't help many of the people. So I just want to read a brief, let me find this. I'm sorry, I broke my hand, so I'm a little on the, okay. I'm like, I can't write, I can't do anything. But we did a needs analysis, and I have a quote from one of our workers who began at a very young age. And I'd like you to hear this. The last question in our interviews was, is there anything you would want people to hear? Mary asked for understanding and for those on the outside not to hate them. They were very aware of the stigma and stereotype that had surrounded their profession. We interviewed a young woman, I'll call Mary. I changed her name in here so that you guys didn't know who she was. She had been on the street since she was 12 years old after her and her mother had been evicted from their home. She had not finished high school and had chosen sex work over foster care due to the exploitation she experienced while she was in the foster care system. She was now 19 and had resigned to the fact that she would never work in any other industry. I asked her why. Mary had already caught 5 prostitution cases. She had been raped numerous times. She suffered from PTSD. She was the mother of 2, and she was working so that the children could have a better life than she had had. At 19, she understood that her arrest record would never allow her to transition into the real world. So I'm talking to this 19-year-old girl who was absolutely beautiful. She was intelligent as all get out. And when I asked her what would help, like education, school, what do you need? She laughed at me. She says, you're kidding me, right? Do you know how many cases I have? Nobody's going to hire me. This is my life. And it was like I had that moment of awakening that all the best efforts sometimes go really wrong. So I just thought you should hear that. So if we say that sex work, and I am absolutely just so happy that people are reporting, the thing I'd like to offer to you is if it were decriminalized, can you imagine how many more would be? That's the ones you know about. In our research, out of the women we talked to, 59% of the people have been raped. Do you think you're getting 59% of the sex workers in there? No. So that's what I'm saying. If we were able to report, can you imagine what would really happen? But when you talk about, we call it the in-demand stings, I can tell you exactly why it happened. And I can take you back to, it was 1983, I think, when it happened to me. And they were doing what they call client stings. It was really hot for the clients. Us on the street had to make split-second decisions whether we should get in cars or not, because the clients wouldn't stop for more than a second. So we can no longer look to see, did the door handle open and could we get out of it? Did they have a weapon next to them? Did this person seem safe? How do we feel about it? We couldn't do that. Not only that, is when they're arresting clients, there's a huge pressure to meet on off roads because they don't want to come on main streets underneath the lights. So what would happen is we get pushed down the side alleys and into dark places where they feel safer stopping. It was one of those nights they were having clients things, and I went into a card room called Georgianne's card room to get out because I thought, fuck, the police are everywhere, excuse my language. I just need to get out of there. And a guy came in and he showed me this roll of money, and he, I thought, okay, I don't have to go back out there. I don't have to deal with this. Nobody wants to stop. It's horrible. Because when you attack the clients, you're actually attacking the worker because you're taking food out of their mouth. It's hard to survive. Your nights get a lot harder. You get a lot hungrier. You drop your prices lower and lower to try to get the ones that are there, and you work 10 times harder. So they're stinging clients. I go in, this guy flashes his money, and he says, yeah, but it's hot out there. I don't want to be seen with you. So I'm going to go around the back, meet me back in the alley. And normally, I know if nobody sees me and nobody knows where I am, that means I'm in trouble. Okay, but this wasn't normal. It was hot. The money was tough. There was nobody out there. All the guys were scared. So I went around in the back and met him. And I got in his car and nobody knew where I went. This man took me to his house. And that night, he held me captive for probably about 6 hours. He strangled me repeatedly. He beat me repeatedly. At the end of it, I had no skin left on my neck and I was bleeding out of every hole in my body. Okay. I would never have gone with him. I would never have gone with him except it was hot. I had to do what I had to do to survive. So when people say in-demand things don't hurt anybody, they take food out of people who are surviving's mouth. The most marginalized are hit the hardest by those things. Because when that happens, the clients have an ability, who have money and are okay to go somewhere else, do. They don't stop the activity, they relocate the activity. So what's left for the people on the street? The worst. The people who have no care, they have nothing to lose. So violence, the upticks in violence is unbelievable. Now, that isn't a sample study because of that, but I've been in sex work over 40 years. So if you want to talk to somebody who's seen what goes on out there, I've been there a couple days. And that's pretty common knowledge for us.
I should also, there's a question. I should also just add that the in-demand policies, for example, in Sweden and Canada, but the Swedish one, has shown also that it's pushed a lot of sex workers out of the country, right? Particularly ones who are migrant workers, and push them underground, even more so. So it may look good for the Swedish government to say this is working, but in fact, it's kind of really suppressed a lot of activity and actually pushed it outside. So a lot of people have actually left Sweden in order to go and work somewhere else, and created the kind of conditions that Kristen is describing here. Canada's facing the same thing where I live. I mean, that is now on the books, and we're hearing and we're seeing the same kind of situations. It makes sex work so much more dangerous for people, in the trade.